Let's talk about Summoner Wars, a two-player asymmetric card battle that can also be played online. Welcome to Brains on Games. I'm Dr. Brian McDonald. In this episode, we're going to talk about a two-player card battler that's not really a card battle, it's a board game battle, but there's also an app so that you can play it online if your friends are far away. It's a game that was introduced to me actually by the Hungry Gamer. We've been playing it online. We're a continent apart, but we've been playing this game off and on since Breakout in March. It's a game called Summoner Wars from Plaid Hat Games. Plaid Hat was kind enough to send me a physical copy of this one because I enjoyed their online games so much. But Summoner Wars is a game for two players only. Kids age 9 and up can figure this one out, although there are some more advanced strategies that might, card combos that might be tough for those 9-year-olds. Games take 40 minutes to an hour to play. Let's take a deeper look at Summoner Wars from Plaid Hat Games. I am very packed in here today because this board is huge and I unfolded it, but really you're only seeing half. This is the halfway mark on the board that indicates, oh, this is one player's territory and then the other half is on this side. But even though I'm a little bit crowded, I wanted you to be able to see how this board works. So Summoner Wars is a game with multiple different decks. So the master set, the box that was sent to me, had several decks inside. I want to say 6 decks with 6 different summoners. But they also, Plaid Hat was kind enough to send me their newest decks, which were the Shimmer Sea Fae and the Storm Goblins. And these are the decks that I've pulled out today. Now it's interesting, this game, that you've got pre-constructed decks that you can buy separately. Each physical copy that you get, you can add to your online game if you're using the app or you're playing on the web, because it can be played in a browser too, if you can believe that. Each deck is pre-constructed, but you can construct your own decks. So you can combine cards from various decks if you think they're going to work really well with a particular summoner. Now, what do these guys do that's special? Well, the Shimmer Sea Fae, first of all, their summoner has an ability to either damage other cards on the board or to heal herself. Meanwhile, these Storm Goblins are neat. They have this lightning ability that transmits through other cards on the board. So this is a light to medium game, and the rules are simple and straightforward. It's just the way the cards work and the way that the different decks work that elevate things, I think, to maybe a more medium level. Your goal is to defeat your opponent's summoner. So the summoner is going to start on the opposite side of the board, and once this gets down to 0 health, you might be able to see there's a number here with a heart beside it. That's your health counter. Once this gets down to 0 health, then your opponent wins the game. There are setup instructions on the back. So you start a game that with certain cards on the board, and this shows you how to set that up from your point of view, and then your summoner is going to be one of those cards that comes out at the start. Conveniently, the board also has a reminder of all the things that you need to do in a round. So on this side, where your decks are placed, where you're keeping track of event cards that might be active on a particular turn, you're keeping track of the magic that you use to summon, you've also got instructions for each round, just as a reminder to keep things organized. On your turn, each player's turn will consist of all of these rounds. So they're going to do all of these things and then their opponent gets to go. In the app, if you're playing through a browser on the app, if you're playing online, it's asymmetric in terms of the turns. So you can take a turn and then your opponent can take their turn whenever they want. You'll get a little notification, oh, it's your turn in one of those games of Summoner Wars. I think it might be my turn actually in my game with Will. You're going to start the game with 2 magic, 5 cards in your hand. At the end of your turn, you draw back up until you've got 5 cards. The start of your turn is the summoning phase, and that's where you're going to place other cards on the board. You do that by spending magic. If I had this Skiz character in my hand, who's kind of a champion, it's going to cost me 4 magic to summon him, so I'm not going to be able to do this on the first turn. But a lot of the other characters in this deck are super cheap. They're only going to cost 1 or 2. Some cards cost nothing to summon. I've got a summoning gate here, so I've got 3 spots at the beginning of my first turn where I can place some cards. Eventually, as cards move around, I might open up those spaces, or my opponent might come in and place a card to block me so that I can't summon in that spot. So that's certainly one of the strategies in the game. You do have some additional, like the base decks have some additional gates that you can summon out later on, and you might be able to play them on even on your opponent's side of the board and start bringing soldiers in on their side. First you summon, then you move your cards. So your cards in this game are really like pieces on the board, pieces on the map. So you can move up to 3 different cards 2 spaces each. So, you can move like this. You can't move diagonally. That counts as your full move, those 2 moves. So, but you want to be careful probably with the storm goblins to keep things lined up so that you've got a circuit that's going to allow you to damage the enemy's cards. Once you've moved, then you can build. So next to your summoner, that's when you can bring in structures, which often are going to be new gates. Some of the decks have structures that can actually move themselves, and they act as like soldiers in the game that can attack and do some damage. Some of the structures are really just about blocking your opponent from moving into that space or from shooting across that space. Once you've moved and built, if you decide to do that, then you get to attack, and each of the cards has a little attack symbol down here. That dictates how many dice you roll and whether you can attack from a distance or you have to be next to the card you're trying to damage. So if there's a sword, that's of course a melee attack. Ranged attacks are represented by a bow and arrow. So here I've got Thrak, who's got an attack of 3, and he can attack at range. So I'm going to take 3 dice and I'm going to roll them, and the symbols on the die are going to determine if I do damage or not. The dice have swords and arrows and this little swish, which is like a wild card. Some of the cards do use that little symbol. None of the ones I have on the table right now do. But now I'm counting up the number of symbols that match the symbol on my card. So it's a ranged attack. I need arrows. I've got 2 arrows. That's 2 damage. So I'm going to place 2 damage counters on my opponent's summoner. And then the next phase is going to begin after I've completed up to 3 attacks. Now here I'm going to get a second attack. I'm probably going to use it too because I've got another character who's in range of the summoner. So this time though I only get to roll 1 die unless this card is damaged. So once this witch takes a damage, their strength goes up by 2, and now I get to roll 3 dice. So that's this character's ability. If she's damaged, she does extra damage. So now I'm going to roll 3 dice, and I'm going to count how many arrows I get on these 3 dice once I've rolled them. You get 3 attacks on your turn. So it's 3 moves, it's 3 attacks. Then you move to, well, really the final active phase of the game is that you can discard. The magic phase, you can discard cards in your hand that you don't want. They go into this discard pile here. There's a space for your discards on the board. Each time you discard, you get 1 magic. I should mention during the attack phase, if you kill another creature, if you manage to knock another card off the board, you get 1 magic as well. So you're trying to build up your magic to summon those big cards, right? You saw earlier, some of them had, it might take 4. Some of them I've seen up to 6 or 7 magic you need in order to summon them. So you can discard all the cards in your hand or none of them or some number in between, and then you draw back up to 5 cards and it's your opponent's turn. This just continues until one player has defeated the other summoner. What skills are you practicing when you play a game like Summoner Wars? Well, executive functioning skills are definitely being used here. The executive functions are the skills and behaviors that you need to work towards a goal. They include things like planning, they include things like budgeting. You're budgeting your cards even when you're trying to decide if you want to discard them or not. You're budgeting your magic each turn. This holds over to the next turn. So if I've got 6 magic and I don't spend any because I didn't summon anything, or I summon things that only cost nothing, well, I get to save that for the next turn as well. So there's some budgeting, there's definitely some planning because you need to get things into position in order to make use of your card's abilities and defeat the enemy summoner. That, of course, when we're working on a game, on a board like this, requires your visual spatial reasoning skills. You've got to get things into position so that you can make use of your 3 attacks, for example. You want to make sure that your characters can move where you want them to move, so you have to summon them in the right places. So you are involving those visual spatial skills. And then you've got a very special ability called fluid reasoning. Fluid reasoning or flexible problem solving is logical thinking skills, and it's about being able to generate a solution to a new kind of problem and being able to adjust your strategy to uh, as parameters change. So you've got a hand of cards that's going to change every time. The way those cards interact is going to be something that you're going to have to think about every turn. And then the layout of the board, you're going to adjust your strategy based on what your opponent did. So there's a lot of fluid reasoning skills involved when we're talking about a game like Summoner Wars. Final thoughts, though, about Summoner Wars. This is an asymmetric duel, an asymmetric battle, and I just love it. I can't say enough good things about this game. The decks are great. They all play differently and feel different. The summoners have different abilities, and the cards interact in various ways. And there are a lot of decks, so there's lots of opportunities to replay and try new strategies or try different cards. You might have factions, some factions you like more than others, but that's true in many of these kinds of games. I think that these cards, they're just brilliant. And the fact that you're not married to the pre-constructed decks. You can construct your own deck in this game, and that's something that a lot of players enjoy too. Now, I like to have just the base pre-constructed decks. I'm not fiddling around with that, and I'll tell you one of the reasons for that at the end of the video. But I like the pre-constructed decks. I think they're great and they're a lot of fun. It's a good way to play the game. But the option to make your own is great too, and it adds to the variability and the replayability. You can, surprise an opponent by having a deck that's unique. You've also got that online version of the game. Now, I'm not a person who really talks about or recommends online games or digital games. I want to play games in person, preferably with family or close friends. But, I go to board game conventions and board game groups and I play with strangers too. I just love games, and I especially love playing in person with another player. But it is a great option here and an opportunity to play games with people who aren't necessarily close by. So Summoner Wars is fantastic. If I buy a separate deck, that can be added to my online account so that I can play with that deck on the digital version of the game. So you're not sort of you're not buying separate games necessarily when you're playing online. So the physical decks that I have can also be digitized in the game. I could buy just a digital deck and then I don't have a physical copy. You can subscribe and have access to all of the decks, so there are lots of options here. But the fact is, the first time I played this game was not a physical copy. It was the online game with the Hungry Gamer. And we've played a whole bunch of games trying out the various decks. And like I said earlier, he's across the continent from me. When am I going to get a chance to play a game with this guy unless I take a long trip or he takes a long trip? We have to do those games online, and it's a physical game. It's got the board game feel. The nice thing maybe about the app or the browser version of the game is that it does keep track of things like increasing this card's strength if it's damaged. There's less that you have to track yourself. You're not getting the benefits of playing in person, but online play, I think, is a great option, especially where you can do your turn and then just leave it. The games can be set up. You can do these private online games where, you can have 2 weeks to do your turn, or a couple of days, or a few hours. So depending on how fast you want those games to go along, and you can have several games going at a time. So I think that the online implementation of the game is a great option, and it plays in a browser, so it's cross-platform. You can, if you've got an Android, if you've got a laptop or a desktop computer, or you're using an iPhone, doesn't matter. You can access this game and play it with your friend. It is a two-player only game, so if you want to talk about downsides, if you've got 3 people coming over, you're not going to be able to play Summoner Wars. But I think the biggest downside, and it is a big one, and this is the reason why I'm not constructing my own decks. The biggest downside of this game is that you've got all of these fantastic decks with summoners that have different abilities, and they're so much fun to play. The box came with, like I said, I think there's 6 different decks in the box, and now I've got these 2 other ones as well. There's no organizer. There's no way to separate out these cards. I can't have like one spot in the box that's just all the bases. So if I want to make my own deck, I can keep track of everything and then put it all back easily at the end. I like these card games to be organized if possible. We don't have an organizer here. I'm not sure if there's a at-home solution or maybe an add-on that's out there somewhere to sort things out for Summoner Wars. But that being said, I love this game. I love it. I love that I can play it with people who are far away. I love that a friend can come over and play it and play the physical version of the game. The dice, everything about this game, fantastic, except I wish they had an organizer inside. So thanks so much to the folks at Plaid Hat Games for sending this game my way and for including the new decks. I think there are even a couple of other new decks that are on the way now. But thanks so much to Plaid Hat for sending this my way and for allowing me to try out all the decks on the online version of the game. I have a game that's going on right now with the Hungry Gamer, in fact. But if you have any questions or comments or suggestions, you can, of course, leave them in the comment section below the video, or you can email me at brian@brainsongames.ca. Brainsongames.ca is the website. That's where future episodes will go, and the previous ones are up there already. Brains on Games is the X handle and the Facebook page and the Instagram feed, so we're all over the place. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to be notified of future ones, you can head on over to YouTube and click that subscribe button. Thanks for joining me, and hopefully I'll see you next time.